You've been sold a lie. We were told that a full-time job in Europe guarantees a comfortable life. But the data tells a very different story. This is not a list of the poorest countries. This is a map of the working poor, places where even full-time workers struggle to keep up with the cost of living. Using official European data, we start from full-time earnings, account for taxes, and look at the real burden of housing, rent, mortgages, and basic utilities to understand what's actually left. This reality brings us to our ultimate ranking, the top 10 EU countries where the highest share of workers is officially classified as at risk of poverty within their own nation. The results are disturbing, and the most shocking part, it's not just Eastern Europe. Some of the wealthiest nations on this continent are on this list. Let's look at the numbers. Welcome to Amazing Europe. Number 10. Austria. Let's get one thing straight from the start. Appearing on this list doesn't mean a country is poor globally. It means the nation has one of the highest percentages of full-time workers at risk of poverty relative to their own country's cost of living. Austria is the perfect example of this trap. On paper, the average full-time Austrian worker earns a solid 58,600 euros gross per year. But Austria's tax wedge is brutal. Averaged over 12 months, a gross monthly salary of almost 4,900 euros shrinks to roughly 3,300 euros net. That sounds respectable, until you look at an often invisible category: immigrants. If you are an Austrian citizen, your risk of in-work poverty sits around 6%. If you are a non-EU migrant, that risk skyrockets past 22%. Austria has one of the widest gaps between local and foreign workers in all of Europe. Why is this divide so exceptionally large? Because Austria maintains rigid, bureaucratic barriers to recognizing foreign qualifications, systematically trapping immigrants in low-wage sectors like cleaning, logistics, and hospitality, regardless of their actual education or professional background. Then comes the housing paradox. Vienna is globally famous for its massive social housing network and rent caps. But there's a critical catch. Waiting lists stretch for years. Newcomers, migrants, and marginalized workers are forced into the private rental market, where costs have exploded, often consuming up to 50% of a retail worker's net salary. Consider an immigrant warehouse worker near Salzburg, 40 hours a week, 1,600 euros net per month, yet paying 800 euros for a private apartment. That is a systemic squeeze, and precisely why 8.9% of Austria's workforce is now officially classified as at risk of poverty. Number 9. Latvia. For years, European politicians have sold us the Baltic Tiger miracle. We were told this was the ultimate post-crisis success story, a model of economic resilience. But step outside the shiny corporate centre of Riga, and that miracle completely collapses. On paper, an average full-time worker in Latvia earns roughly 22,260 euros gross per year. But once the state takes its nearly 28% cut in taxes and contributions, that worker is left with barely 1,337 euros a month. In Western Europe, that might cover a student's rent. Here, it has to support a livelihood. Then, the brutal Baltic winter arrives. Heating and basic housing costs easily devour over 535 euros of that paycheck. What's left? A miserable 800 euros to cover food, healthcare, transport, and emergencies for the entire month. And remember, these are only the averages. The systemic flaw here is intentional. The country's macroeconomic recovery was built on extreme wage restraint to keep exports highly competitive. The GDP looks fantastic, but the domestic workforce is being sacrificed. The fallout is a silent, devastating crisis. Investigative journalists have documented full-time workers, like single mothers in regional towns, who are forced to rely on church donations just to afford basic groceries or discounted wallpaper. When a 40-hour workweek can't even guarantee bread on the table, people leave. It's a severe demographic bleeding, with desperate workers packing their bags for Germany, Ireland, or Scandinavia simply to survive. This is the dark, invisible side of the Baltic tiger, a recovery built on the backs of cheap labour, which explains exactly why 9.0% of Latvia's working population is officially classified as at risk of poverty. Number 8. Malta. Picture a sun-drenched Mediterranean tax haven, booming with iGaming billions, luxury yachts, and digital nomads. From the outside, Malta looks like an economic paradise. But beneath the surface lies a brutal two-tier society actively pricing out its own foundation. On paper, the math seems decent. The average full-time worker earns about €33,500 gross a year. The government takes a relatively mild 25% cut, leaving you with just under €2,090 net per month. So, where is the trap? It's geographic and systemic. You are on a microscopic, overpopulated island with infinite demand. The massive influx of high-earning foreign professionals and golden passport investors has triggered a catastrophic housing bubble. That €2,090 paycheck is instantly mutilated by landlords. A basic apartment will easily devour over €835 of your net income, and significantly more if you are anywhere near the tourist and commercial hubs. This leaves a worker with roughly €1,250 to survive on an island that has to import almost all its food and consumer goods at a massive premium. The structural flaw is obvious. Malta's economic boom relies entirely on a vast army of low-wage retail, hospitality, and delivery workers, many of them imported third-country nationals, whose salaries have flatlined while the cost of living went hyperinflationary. National socio-economic reports highlight a grim reality. Single-earner households and families working full-time in retail are now queuing at local food banks. Despite grinding out 40-hour weeks, they are trapped in substandard, overcrowded apartments, relying on child benefits just to afford basic groceries. The island's explosive wealth is literally crushing the people who serve it. And that is exactly why 9.2% of Malta's working population is officially classified as at risk of poverty. Number 7. Luxembourg. Look at this number. Nearly €83,000 gross a year. That is the average full-time salary in the wealthiest nation in Europe. It sounds like absolute financial freedom. After the government takes its 32% cut, a worker is left with a massive €4,691 net per month. Yet, in one of the most stunning economic paradoxes on the continent, 9.6% of Luxembourg's resident workforce is officially classified as at risk of poverty. How is it mathematically possible to be poor in a country dripping with wealth? The answer lies in a brutal statistical distortion and an overheated housing market. The country is home to a massive elite of highly paid resident bankers, corporate executives, and EU officials. Their massive salaries artificially inflate the national median income. Because the poverty line is calculated at 60% of that inflated median resident workers in normal jobs, like retail, care, or hospitality, are mathematically crushed. Add to this the over 200,000 cross-border commuters from France, Belgium, and Germany who flood in daily. While they don't count in the resident poverty stats, their purchasing power supercharges the economy and drives local demand to extreme levels. And then comes the rent. That €4,691 net is just an average. If you are a low-wage resident, you earn far less, but you still face a housing market completely detached from reality. A basic apartment easily incinerates over €1,870 a month. This leaves thousands with a residual income that rapidly vanishes in Europe's most expensive supermarkets. NGO reports highlight a growing underclass of resident cleaners and shop assistants forced to live in overcrowded shared flats or rely on social grocery stores just to feed their children. In Luxembourg, extreme wealth hasn't eradicated poverty. it has simply priced the working class out of their own country. Number 6. Greece. A decade after the most brutal financial meltdown in modern European history, the headlines claim Greece has finally recovered. But the reality on the streets of Athens tells a much darker story. The absolute normalization of the working poor. Let's look at the math. The average full-time worker in Greece earns a meagre €17,954 gross per year. Despite this, the state still exacts a 25.7% cut in taxes and social contributions, leaving that worker with an average of just €1,110 net a month. By the time rent and basic utilities drain over €440, they are left with a residual €666. That is €666 to cover a full month of food, transport, healthcare, and emergencies in an economy deeply battered by inflation. But there is a statistical illusion hiding the true scale of the devastation. During the austerity years, median incomes collapsed so violently that the mathematical poverty threshold sank right along with them. Society simply got poorer as a whole. Yet, even with this artificially lowered bar, a staggering 9.7% of the Greek workforce is officially classified as at risk of poverty. The structural cause isn't just low wages, it is the total dismantling of labour protections. To survive the crisis, the job market pivoted heavily to involuntary part-time roles, temporary contracts, and decimated collective bargaining. The fallout is a generation of the new poor. Documentaries and European NGOs report a heartbreaking reality: dual-earner households and full-time retail workers who routinely cut back on heating and nutrition. These are employed parents, paralysed by social stigma, queuing quietly at church-run soup kitchens because a 40-hour workweek is no longer enough to feed their children. Number 5. Italy. Italy is a G7 economic powerhouse, synonymous with global luxury and high-end manufacturing. Yet, behind the postcard image lies a devastating labour market anomaly. According to OECD data, it is the only European country where workers' purchasing power has actually shrunk since 1990. Italians today can buy less with their salaries than they could over 30 years ago. This collapse has produced a deeply fractured two-tier labour market. Older generations hold heavily protected permanent contracts, while younger workers face a broken system. Millions are trapped in precarious or part-time roles, but the true systemic failure runs deeper. Even a standard 40-hour week is no longer enough to live on. A key driver of this crisis is Italy's pension burden. The country spends roughly 16% of its entire GDP servicing retirement costs, one of the highest rates in the world. To fund this bill, the state crushes the active workforce with punishing taxes, leaving full-time employees with stagnant wages to face soaring rents in cities like Milan and Rome. The human consequences are stark. A massive brain drain is pushing young talent toward Northern Europe, while at home, a new category of poverty is emerging. National Caritas data reveals a striking figure. Nearly a quarter of the people lining up at food banks actually hold jobs. Consider Stefano, a 43-year-old shop assistant working full-time in Milan, one of Europe's wealthiest cities. His salary, eroded by rent and taxes, leaves him queuing at the Pane Quotidiano charity for basic staples like milk and bread. He is one among millions. In modern Italy, a paycheck is no longer a shield against poverty, which is precisely why 10.2% of the full-time workforce is officially classified as at risk of it. Number 4. Estonia. We all know Estonia as the Silicon Valley of the Baltics. It's the birthplace of Skype, a pioneer of e-residency and a hyper-digital paradise that attracts tech nomads from all over the world. But behind the sleek glass offices of Tallinn, there is a completely different silent Estonia struggling to survive. Let's look at the numbers. The average full-time worker earns around €26,540 gross per year. the state takes a relatively light 20.5% in taxes, leaving a net monthly salary of about €1,758. Compared to Southern Europe, it doesn't sound terrible. So why is an alarming 10.5% of the working population officially at risk of poverty? The answer is a lethal combination of skyrocketing living costs and a deeply divided workforce. Estonia's economic boom has heavily favoured the IT and financial sectors, while completely leaving behind the traditional working class, particularly in retail, basic services, and the industrial eastern regions. While a software developer thrives, a full-time retail worker or cleaner earns far less than that €1,758 average, and they all have to face the exact same brutal housing market. Rents in Tallinn have exploded, and, when combined with the brutal Baltic winter, your basic housing and heating costs routinely incinerate over €700 of your net income. What's left? Barely €1,000 to cover food, transport, and emergencies in a country that recently experienced some of the highest inflation rates in the entire Eurozone. For many low-skilled workers, a 40-hour workweek simply cannot outpace the cost of heating an apartment and putting food on the table. It is a harsh two-tier reality, a digital utopia for the high-skilled few and a daily financial grind for everyone else. Number 3. Romania. When you think of Eastern Europe, you probably imagine a low-tax haven designed to attract foreign corporations. But if you are a local employee, the reality is a brutal fiscal nightmare. Let's look at Romania. On paper, a full-time worker earns around €21,100 gross per year. But here is the shocking plot twist. Romania has the highest tax burden on workers out of all the countries in this video. The state wipes out a staggering 36.9% of that salary right from the start. Why? Because a few years ago, the government shifted almost all social security contributions entirely onto the shoulders of the employee. That gross salary instantly collapses to just €1,109 net a month. Then comes the cost of shelter. Rent and basic utilities in economic hubs like Bucharest or Cluj easily devour over €440. What's left? A residual €665 to survive the month. But here is the killer. While wages are Eastern, the cost of food and basic goods in Romanian supermarkets has rapidly caught up to Western European prices. You simply cannot sustain a modern European life on €665 a month. This toxic squeeze is exactly why an immense 10.7% of Romania's workforce is officially classified as at risk of poverty. The socio-economic fallout is devastating. European reports frequently highlight dual-earner families in rural counties who, despite both parents working full-time, still cannot afford adequate winter heating or basic educational expenses for their children. The ultimate result? One of the largest peacetime demographic bleedings in history. Millions of young Romanians have simply packed their bags and moved to Western Europe, leaving behind a hollowed-out workforce trapped in a low-wage, high-tax equilibrium. Number 2. Spain. Okay, we know it's no surprise to find Spain in this top 10, but it might shock some to see it in second place, ranking worse than Romania and Greece. In reality, it shouldn't surprise us at all once we look at the causes. On paper, an average full-time worker earns a decent €33,700 gross a year, with a relatively moderate 22.5% tax rate, and because salaries are traditionally paid in 14 instalments, that translates to a standard monthly paycheck of roughly €1,860 net. But that average masks a brutal reality. While the Spanish labour market is plagued by contract trickery like fijos discontinuos, intermittent contracts masked as permanent, just for the glory of politicians who want to boast about lowering unemployment, the true systemic failure goes even deeper. Even for those working a standard 40-hour week all year round, the math simply doesn't work. Then, the housing market delivers the fatal blow. In major economic hubs like Madrid, Barcelona, or Valencia, rents have skyrocketed completely out of control. Housing costs easily vaporize over €870 of that monthly paycheck, and realistically, much more for new tenants, leaving almost zero financial buffer. The consequences are devastating. Oxfam and Caritas reports reveal a terrifying statistic. Over 2.5 million people in Spain are now classified as working poor. The true victims are families experiencing the rapid downward mobility of the middle class. We are talking about households where the main earner holds a supposedly permanent contract in retail or hospitality. Yet, after paying rent, they must quietly queue at local food banks just to feed their children. This systemic squeeze is exactly why an alarming 11.2% of the Spanish workforce is now officially classified as at risk of poverty. Before revealing number one, if you found this video informative, we kindly ask you to support our project by leaving a like, subscribing to the channel, clicking the bell, and enabling all notifications. We remind you that this ranking focuses on workers at risk of poverty, but if you want to learn about the situation of pensioners in Europe, write pension in the comments. Number 1. Bulgaria. When foreign investors look at Bulgaria, they see an economic playground, cheap labour, low taxes, and low operating costs. But for the people actually living and working there, it is a daily fight for survival. Let's look at the raw numbers. The average full-time worker earns just €15,387 gross per year. After a 22.4% tax cut, that salary shrinks to a monthly net of barely €995. If you live in a major city like Sofia or Plovdiv, basic rent and utilities will instantly vaporize about €400 of that paycheck. This leaves a residual €597 to cover food, healthcare, and emergencies for an entire month. But the systemic problem goes much deeper than just low wages. The real tragedy is the household dependency ratio. Due to severe demographic aging and informal inactivity, one low-wage worker often has to financially support multiple non-working family members. The socio-economic fallout is catastrophic. Caritas and local NGOs report a heartbreaking reality. People working 40 hours a week in warehouses, retail, or cleaning services who simply cannot afford winter heating bills. Despite having full-time jobs, they are forced to rely on church donations, subsistence farming, or money sent by relatives abroad just to eat. This despair fuels one of the highest emigration rates in the world, with the youngest and brightest fleeing to Germany, Austria, or Western Europe, leaving behind a trapped workforce. It is an economic model built on exhaustion, which perfectly explains why a staggering 11.8% of Bulgaria's working population is officially classified as at risk of poverty. Just a quick reminder, if you want to know what the situation is like for pensioners across Europe, write pension in the comments and we'll make a dedicated video about it. In the meantime, we recommend watching this video where we reveal the 10 European countries with the highest number of people living in extreme poverty. A situation even worse than what we've seen today. That's all for this video. See you next time.